said, you know, Phil, are you going to go back for your reunion that's just coming up this year? And he says, you know, it's this weekend. I said, hell, mine is too. I said, I've been working on my speech. He says, well, I'm not going to go. I said, why not? And he said, well, all they're doing is having lunch. And I don't want to drive 3.5 hours up there to have lunch and come back home. Well, I thought about that, you know, and then I got to thinking, well, how about these other things that we have done other than these banquets? And the list is long. It starts off with, I can't read my own writing, excuse me. We've been to the Aerospace Education Center. We've been to the tour of Hall High School various times. We have been to the State Capitol Rotunda. We've now been to the Pulaski County Rotunda. We have been to the Clinton Library. We've had a run on the river. We have had a cruise on the riverboat. We've had a cruise on the riverboat that never left the dock. We've been to the baseball park, and we've had a coffee for the ladies when we had a golf tournament for the men. Now, in today's world, that ain't going to cut it. So we now have golf tournaments for the men and the women, golf games for both sexes, which we again had this year, and I want to give the results of the golf tournament as reported to me by Dennis Mills. 7 people showed up for what was described as a beautiful day as compared to 5 years ago when it was cold and blustery, and I thought the people that played were half-assed nuts. But this particular time, they had great weather, and they had 7 people show up. One team, which was led by Lennis Dean's husband, who is a golf professional. I mean, it's sort of, you know, who's over there fixing these teams? John Moss thought, well, were you in on the betting on that deal? So anyway, Jerry played, and they had Kathy Thomas was on that team. Randy Coleman was on that team, and Richard Smith. Now, the 3 people that they played against, supposedly, there wasn't really a competition, but Dennis told me the 3 people that were on his team were himself, Dennis Mills, Steve Holcomb, and the third one was Hall Kreitz. And this is Dennis' words. He said, we cheated our way around the course. In typical, you know, Hall High fashion, we'll go ahead and just cheat our way. Anyway, golf was good. They had a good time, which I think is probably the most important thing. The next thing.
The one nice thing about being a golf widow is that I've lived all over the United States, but the best time was when you had a stand-up and we were counted as according to how many people had how many jobs since we left high school. And first it was everybody who's had 5 or more jobs remain standing, the rest of you sit down. If you had 10 or more jobs, remain standing, the rest of you sit down. If you had 15 or more jobs, you know, remain standing. My husband goes, honey, sit down there, going to think you can't hold down the job.
I do remember that now. You people have marvelous memories, I can tell you. Amazing to me. Okay, where were we? So, here we are at the 55th reunion after all these things that we have done. And I quite frankly don't remember back 55 years ago how this whole process came with me being president of the class. I do not remember if I was nominated or if I volunteered to run for the office. But either way, you can rest assured that at the time, I didn't think there was no term limit. So, I I'm trying to update my speech, and last night I want to bring it right up to the instant point in time. There were 3 young ladies who came up to me and said how much they saw me as not having changed any. And that was Donna Hadfield Foss. That was the second young lady was Elizabeth Vines, who is Johnny Vines' wife. And the third one was Peggy Morris Hip. She said, "You look great, you hadn't changed a bit." So, here we are tonight, and I'm going to prove to you that I have not really changed much. I brought my trusty valet, who after 52 years has served me well, shall we say. I would add you one other thing, that I was recently in the doctor's office, and we got to talking about how long we'd been married, and I told this gal that I'd been married 52 years, and she looked at me and she says, "You know, anybody that has been married to you 52 years needs a medal." Boy, did she know me. Anyway, here we go. Last time, final, I'm going to show you what a real letter jacket looks like. Now, Charles Buxton asked me last night, he said, "Do you still have that letter jacket?" And I didn't want to answer him because I knew what I was going to do tonight. So anyway, here we go. The guys at my golf club would say it's a perfect fit. We have to have a team to take it off. You're pulling the. Oh, me.
You want this back?
Yeah, I better put that back on. Thank you, dear. Okay. Trying to keep you folks entertained. Sometimes a tough job. Anyway, where I am now is a story about, again, the fact that the booklet didn't really impress me all that much as to keeping me on track as to what I needed to talk about. But as I was going through my files, I found what we were referred to as our hall call. Now, if you'll remember what that was, it was the little phone book that was our yellow pages, which had everybody's name, address, and phone number. And I estimated there were probably 1,200 names in this book, and there were only 12 places that people either didn't have a phone or chose not to turn their phone number in. Let's say that they couldn't afford a telephone. 12 out of 1,200. That's 1%, which sort of reaffirms to me how fortunate we were to be blessed with the opportunities that we were given. And this little booklet that I had, I was just amazed at the phone numbers and how the whole thing went, because it listed Mohawk and Franklin and Capitol and all these things. Well, I'm riding down the road coming to up here and get a phone call from my daughter. She says, "Well, Dad, you ready for your speech?" I said, "Well, it's not really a speech. I don't give a speech. I just am the MC, and I have to get up and tell a few jokes and all that kind of stuff." She says, "Well, what are you going to talk about?" I said, "Well, I normally get this booklet, and I'll get some inspiration from what's in that booklet. But this year I struck out and didn't find much. But I found this crazy thing that was phone numbers. And I said, it had all this stuff listed. Mohawk 322, la la la, Mohawk, Mohawk. She said, "Mohawk? What's that?" I said, "Well, we used to have a phone number, and the first two numbers were actually letters. And most of the kids that I went to school with, their phone was a Mohawk. And she said, Mohawk? How did that work? I said, well, just look on the phone, you know, and the number 6 has M-O in there. So you punched 6 2 times or dialed 6 2 times. She says, you know, I don't get it. I don't understand. I said, well, if it was a Franklin number, then it was a 3-7 that you dialed in. And she said, that's really crazy. But she said, you know, that gives me an idea. You could talk to this class about the change in technology between what things were like then, what they are like now. And I said, you know, Meredith, I actually thought of that. I thought that might be a good thing to do. But I'm not up to speed on all this latest stuff, this Alexander and all that, Cherie and all this stuff. And I said, you know, I just can't explain it all, so I couldn't possibly talk about it. So she said, well, you know, Dad, you probably gonna be better off to stick with your flip phone and that Mohawk thing. My own daughter. So, moving along, and the other thing that the hall call had was your homeroom number. And I was thinking, why would you have your homeroom number in this next to your name and everything? And I decided that I know we couldn't remember what our homeroom number was. So we carried around this little phone book and, I'm in homeroom 404. Yeah. So anyway, you had your homeroom number, you had your telephone number. So I did pick out a couple of numbers, and I'm going to read them off. And if anybody recognizes them, please say it. If it's your own phone, don't say anything. But if I can, again, read my own writings. Here we go. The first one is Mohawk 34363. Anybody recognize that phone number? Becky?
No.
Oh, you had.
But I can tell you my number. I know my number. 663-5659.
Very good. Well, that phone number belonged to our president, Mike Booth. Didn't remember it. All right, here's one more. Mohawk 36433. No? That's correct. And I was hoping that Richard would remember it. Not so much, huh? Oh me. Well, anyway, so much for all that phone business. Our speaker for tonight is someone I hope that we certainly enjoy. And the thing about these reunions are that there's a whole group of people that put these things together. They don't just pop out like they were put in the ground and pop up and all of a sudden we have a crop or we have a forest tree or whatever. I do want to recognize the people involved. First of all, Julie Dell and her husband. They're not here tonight, but they did volunteer their home for us to have a party in until a major medical situation developed with Joe, her husband. But anyway, they were nice enough to offer their house. Andy and Mindy and Mindy Clark, of course, offered their home to us, and we want to thank them for this afternoon, a lovely evening. I'm always amazed that our resident artists can create a booklet cover that is just so spectacular and says something about the times that we're in and the time that we are going through. And that our artist, of course, is Janice Funk Polychrome. She's here. There you go. She did a beautiful job with this booklet cover this year, I think. I want to thank Bill Woolley, who's the guy running around with the video camera. If you haven't had your picture made or the video deal, you need to go over and stand in front of the video and tell them who you are and where you live and anything else really that you want to say. They're going to create a DVD. The photographer that's been running around is Melissa Forrester. Is that correct, Barbara? That's Barbara's daughter, her one and only daughter. And she is going to incorporate the still shots that she's made into the DVD. So I would urge all of you who have...
Bill's gonna incorporate them into the DVD.
Who? Well, okay, sorry. Picky. Yes, Barbara, I'm telling you. I don't know how Butch gets away with anything. But anyway, they're going to have a DVD that includes the still photos as well. And if you haven't purchased one, I'm certain that Barbara would be happy to take your money, and it would be fun to have it home to show the grandkids from time to time. I guess the last people that we want to thank are the entire reunion committee, and this is the group of people that have worked tirelessly year after year after year. We've had a couple of people added to the list and a couple that have dropped off, but I'm going to read these names, and just raise your hand if you're here tonight so we can remember who you are. Orson Berry, Andy Clark, Randy Coleman, Julie Beth Dell, Gary Gazette, Pat Hurst, Kay Mapes, Dennis Mills, Marilyn Newton, Jerry Sin, and Lynn Wilson. You've all done a great job. And of course, I haven't left Barbara out because I don't know what I'm doing. I left her out on purpose because I want to say something different about Barbara. She is the reason that we're all here tonight. There you go. Special thanks to Barbara. She tirelessly works so we can have these events and stay connected as we all are all over the world. Bobby Duffy, 10 years ago at a 45th, wrote something that I have saved and want to read. As Bobby Duffy wrote for the reunion of 45 years, how fortunate we are to have each other, and grateful we all should be to Barbara. The value of the gift of sustained friendship, not to mention lots of laughs along the way, is immeasurable, and that couldn't be said better. Barbara, thank you. I'm told to thank Butch too, so Butch, my hat's off to you, buddy. You've done a great job as well. Okay, winding this show down, our featured speaker tonight is a Little Rock native. He's an alumni of Wrightsville Elementary, Forest Heights Junior High, and Hall High School. He wrote to me, I look back on the Hall High days and marveled at how well those teachers there had prepared me. I know I am not the only one in our class to feel that way, but for me, Hall High just lifted me higher academically than I thought I might have accomplished otherwise. I did not get high grades in high school, but I remember making my first A, and that was in Martha Rogers' U.S. history class. Well, our speaker went all in. He parlayed that 1A into a degree in education, a bachelor's degree at the University of Central Arkansas. He has a master's degree in education also from the University of Central Arkansas. He has a master's of arts in history from the University of Houston. He's taught in 3 high schools and 3 junior highs in the Pulaski County school system. He's taught in 1 high school in Humble, Texas. He spent 11 years with Allstate Insurance Company, then returned to Little Rock and served as an adjunct instructor at UALR. He now is a LifeQuest instructor and occasionally an 8-week class teaches about U.S. history. He is a member of the Hall High Tribe organization, and he's taught every grade 7 through 12 except 8th. Now, I was in the 8th grade homeroom class with David Crittenden and Clark Closser and a few other malcontents. And believe it or not, we talked our homeroom teacher to letting us read from Lolita instead of the Bible. I can now understand why he never taught in the 8th grade. He connected with his current wife, Lynn, at the 40th reunion, and they were married in 2006. One other vital piece of information, his homeroom was 501. His phone number was Mohawk 61545. Please welcome Jerry Sin.
Well, I've spoken before a lot of classes, as he pointed out. Now I know why I didn't ever have 8th graders. But I never thought I'd have this audience, and it's a great honor, and I appreciate the committee and Willie asking me to do this. What they've asked me to do is to talk for just a little while about the history of Hall High School. And boy, I knew this Willie would be a hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. If I could say something personal just at the beginning, when I was teaching, I think the time that I enjoyed the most was my last decade at Humboldt High School down in Texas, because I had the honor students. I had the U.S. History Advanced Placement kids. And they're 17, 18 years old, and they can really keep you on your toes, they can keep you young. But I would have occasion at times where I would brag to them about my high school class. And I'd point out to them that they didn't know anybody that's sitting by them in class or whatever, they didn't know what those people were going to do someday. And we had some really remarkable people. And I always mentioned Fred Tackett, because I was in the band with Tackett, and would tell them, that he backed up Bob Dylan and all the things he did. He's with Little Feat, and they thought that was kind of interesting. That I sat by Bob Palmer in the Hall High band, and this guy went on, to be the pop music editor of the New York Times. And then, of course, I mentioned Danny Davis, and I would always tell them, that he was Niles the butler on The Nanny. And several of those classes would kind of looked back at me and said, Mr. Sin, he can't be from Little Rock. He has a British accent. So, in looking at the history of our beloved school, as I've done over the last few weeks, and I've always been kind of interested in this, one of the first things I did, and I'm not going to spend much time on it, is just take a second look at the superintendent at the time this school when they decided to build it. And that decision actually involved building 2 schools, Horace Mann, which opened in 1955, and then Hall High School in 1957. One of the things I did was ask the librarian over at the school if I could borrow the very first annual. Some of you have seen it already, but the very first one, 57, 58. And I hadn't looked at it in a long time, and when I opened it up, lo and behold, who did they dedicate it to but Virgil Blossom, the superintendent. Later on, Blossom, of course, would run into the problems that went along with the 57 crisis at Central. He would be run off, I guess you'd say, like most superintendents are after a while. But he was instrumental in some of the decision-making that took place where they were deciding to actually build a Hall High School. Now, those events, I'm not going to go into all of them, but you know, Blossom did have the responsibility for trying to figure out what to do, how the school district should respond to the Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Education. And the plan they came up with, which was to allow a few black students into Central and to open hall without any black students, was known as the Blossom Plan. Okay, let's get the school open. Of course, it was built not built, but it was opened in 1957. None of them, of those first students who came there, had any idea that the next year there wouldn't be a school. That's the famous lost year, 58, 59. But it was interesting to read some things about the very beginning. For instance, and I had something in an email about this, but I was curious about the teachers that they brought over from Central. And it turned out it's a list of about 10. I think the faculty had maybe 30. It's a small faculty at first. So there were a large number of them, and I listed them one time there in the one of the emails I did. There was one in this first annual, just one name I happened to come across, a science teacher named Farrell Simpson. I guess he was just there 1 year. And the only reason I mention it is he later was I think, science department chairman up at ASTC when I went to college. Another thing that they really couldn't have anticipated. Of course, Terrell Powell was the first principal. I don't think he would have ever guessed that within 2 years, he would be asked to be the superintendent of the district. He served as superintendent for 2 years. I don't know if they called him interim or just he was the superintendent. But he obviously didn't want to keep that job. But that's why we had Mr. Spitzer in the 10th grade instead of Terrell Powell. Now, in October of '57, they dedicated the school. There's a picture of that happening in that annual, and it's blown up here, but I mean, it's hard to see these things, but it's Jess Matthews, the principal of Central, giving the portrait of Hall, the namesake of the school, to Terrell Powell. This event, October of '57, in the gym. And one quick note here, because we seldom think about this, but the school is named after a man, Robert Cleveland Hall, who served as superintendent for something like 32 years. He was superintendent of schools in the early part of the 20th century. There are not too many 32-year superintendents anymore. This portrait, interestingly enough, is of course still there. It's actually in the media center, though I doubt anybody saw it today. And they later gave a portrait very similar to it, exactly the same, of Terrell Powell. And those two portraits are kind of upstairs. They're sort of hidden now in the media center. I don't know where I would guess they were originally in the foyer. So that first school year, one other thing I wanted to mention quickly, you may have read when I mentioned this in the email, the very first football play, the first time the Hall High Warriors ever took the field, kickoff, to Kingsbury of Memphis over at Quigley Stadium, was run back all the way, something like 85 yards, by Jimmy Holly, tailback. And I don't know if any of you remember this, but I remember Terrell Powell in a pep assembly mentioning that, that was our very first football play, and we're going from there, and they did. There would be a great deal of success in football, and we'll get to when that ended. It's really ended. Here's a note that the Inkwell editor, a student named Judy Crowden, wrote the lyrics to A Pledge to Hall. And the music was written by Miss Pinky, Mary Frances Thompson. Now, just this fall, I happened to get to hear the student body, or at least some of them, it was a choir and band concert over there, sing the alma mater. And apparently at some point, the students had come up with a little addition, which I thought was really kind of neat. As they sang "Down Through the Years We Go," then they all shout, "We go!" You know, and it really fits. We should have had that. The first graduation